Whether you've just started teaching or spent decades in the classroom, you know there's always more to learn. But where do you start? Well, here at Hillsdale College, we have the answer for you. Tried and True, a primer on sound pedagogy by Hillsdale College professor Daniel Copeland. In this little book, you'll read lessons from more than 25 years of Dr. Copeland's classroom experience. It's all distilled into 14 easy-to-read chapters on lesson planning, assignments, and classroom management, and it will help you improve your skills and inspire you as a teacher, one of our most important professions. Whether you've been in front of the classroom for years, or this is your first year, when you read Tried and True, you'll find something to help you keep improving every single day. You don't need to go at it alone. Let Dr. Copeland's real-world experience encourage you and inspire you. You can get your copy today at hillsdale.edu/true. That's hillsdale.edu/TRUE. Thanks for listening.
Welcome to the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast, bringing you insight into classical education and its unique emphasis on human virtue and moral character, responsible citizenship, content-rich curricula, and teacher-led classrooms. Now your host, Scot Bertram.
Thanks for listening. The Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast is part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio. You also can find more information on topics and ideas discussed on this show at our website, k12.hillsdale.edu. Thanks for listening. We're joined by Ian Nugent. He is Assistant Principal at Atlanta Classical Academy in Atlanta, Georgia. Ian, thanks so much for joining us.
Sure, thanks, Scott. Good to be back.
We talked today about a great piece that you wrote for the Classical Classroom, which is the Hillsdale College K-12 Education Office blog site. People can find that up on the web, about the importance of wearing school uniforms. In it, you focus largely on the meaning of wearing uniforms rather than the utility of wearing them. So let's begin by asking, how do school uniforms help to reflect a school's mission and a school's culture?
Yeah, no, so this is a question I, as the assistant principal, someone responsible for enforcing a policy, school culture, discipline, I've thought a lot about, because as I've kind of gone through my career, I've had, as many conversations as anyone has had with middle schoolers, high schoolers, et cetera, about these small things or seemingly small things. And it just seemed like I should have an answer in a way that is more than just because we said so or because it's policy, right? And that because the way we talk about it often in conversation is something deeper than that, right? We actually think there's really something good about students identifying with one another through what they wear and reflecting a readiness to learn and a reverence for kind of in some way of what they're learning through what they're wearing. And in the piece, I tell a story about being in Arlington National Cemetery with our juniors last year. And when we went, we all were in formal uniforms. And so that for our high schoolers is a white dress shirt with a tie and a jacket and with slacks. And there was lots of other schools, as you might imagine, touring the cemetery. But there was an elderly gentleman and his wife, who seemed like he was a former member of the armed service. And he was observing us as we very, kind of respectfully, the students entered the site of the Eternal Flame, the Kennedy burial site. I kind of observed, read the plaques, and then kind of very silently exited, and then continued the tour toward the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. And I heard him just remark to his wife and say, it's so nice that some people still understand that what this means, right? And it was partially, I think, a comment on their behavior. They were behaving the way you would hope someone would behave in a place of reverence. But he was looking at our students and just admiring, how they were dressed, right? That they weren't like other, students there who were just kind of wearing whatever. And it made me think, I thought, that is something we should actually make part of our school culture, that we talk to our students about the fact that people notice this, right? That if you're doing something that you believe to be important, right, like going to a job interview, you want to make a statement with what you're wearing and how you're presenting yourself that, you're taking time, you're thinking seriously about this thing that you're doing and your presence with it. And so I started just reflecting on that, and I started writing the piece, and then I started kind of adding to it in different ways that I thought there were other aspects of the uniform that we should talk more about as an explanation of why, right? Because that's always the question with students, right?
Yeah.
So if we have a why for our policies, I think that students actually maybe respect them more and might even actually come to value them, right, in a way, and treasure the fact that, oh, it's not just an arbitrary exercise of academic power, right? This is actually something that I can actually find meaning in and value in the same way.
You wrote in the piece that the uniforms will help identify, and your story certainly attests to this, identify students with both one another and with our school, with your school. And I think about just something as simple as not being where you were, but being at the local grocery store and seeing kids in uniforms and knowing that they go to perhaps the same school that my kids go to. It gives students an identity, and I think in a way reminds them that what they do is a reflection on who or what they belong to.
Yeah, no, actually, I remember in the first year of our school, our founding principal, Terrence Moore, read us a piece from either a letter from Jefferson on education and public school, or a reflection in Benjamin Franklin. I think it was Ben Franklin's autobiography, talking about schooling for kids. Mm-hmm. And he said that, in the schools of the United States and in these small towns, it actually was really important, right, for a sense of identity and belonging, of ownership for the students of a school to even be seen, not in school, wearing their habits or their uniform, right? Because that their conduct would be seen by people in the public space, right? It's not just something that happens in school, right? That they represent the school. And that's actually an important thing for the community to actually witness, that these students who are identified with the place conduct themselves in such a way that is, worthy of admiration and remarking on, right? That's actually a good thing. So yeah, that is definitely part of it. That's an important piece.
Talking with Ian Nugent, assistant principal at Atlanta Classical Academy. All right, what about uniforms and their role in the classroom or in student learning? Can uniforms meaningfully assist in student learning?
I think so. So oftentimes when people talk about uniforms, the line is, right, well, they level the playing field, they eliminate distractions, right? That's a very kind of pithy way of articulating their utility, right? And the way that they actually make the learning process easier, more productive, right? And with less obstacle. And it's true that there's absolutely nothing untrue about that statement. But oftentimes if you say that to a student, especially one that may be kind of given to rhetorical engagement and sophism, they say, oh, well, what about, me is distracting? How am I distracting students by wearing this, this necklace, or wearing a red pair of shoes versus a black pair of shoes, right? Why is everyone paying attention to me, right? And they'll kind of give these remarks. And the response, right, is if you actually are, if you've been in schools, it's not at all that, right, I'm deep in the discussion of political philosophy, and then something catches my eye that a student is wearing that has an off color on it, and I go, I just cannot think. But it's the fact that if you are held to a uniform standard, right, that everyone is adhering to together, right, then right, by that outward expression, that there is a baseline of equality that exists between you and every other student, right? It is a way of committing to each other, one another, in form, that no one is better than the other. We are here for the same purpose, and that we are all equally deserving and all equally obligated to engage in this work of learning. And so if that is the kind of understanding that is conveyed through wearing of uniform in the same way as everyone else, according to the policy or the standard, that is helpful, because what it eliminates is just one more of the billion things that students can make distinctions on, right? It's like if you are, it's not that people are distracted by colors or the way that, certain clothing is worn or something like that. The main thing is that if you allow, right, if you just have a dress code, right, like most schools do, you still have this unspoken, sometimes explicitly stated rivalry with students of who has the brand, or am I in style or out, right? And there's this just hierarchy that develops socially. There are comparisons made, even implicitly. People feel kind of either left out or kind of brought in according to this superficial piece of cloth or whatever that they're wearing. And that that's what we're actually eliminating, right? There's a billion things that you cannot eliminate just in human interaction that still create hierarchy, or students try to create, groups and stuff in schools, right? This is like the whole premise of Mean Girls, right?
Sure.
But if we can eliminate one of those things in a really effective way, and at the same time replace it with a positive statement and positive effect that binds them together, that speaks something true about what we believe about education, that everyone is deserving of it and everyone comes to it equally, and also elevates the learning experience by making them wear something just a little bit more, formal, a little bit, with a collar on a daily basis and with a tie once a week. Because that tells them this is not something you just do casually, right? We're doing serious things. We're studying serious work in whatever we're doing, and that requires a mindset that you can convey with what you wear.
You claim in the piece that wearing a uniform for school is, in a way, an act of service for others. How would you describe that?
A little bit bold, maybe, and maybe people will take some issue with this, but similar to the idea of, committing yourself mutually, right? I and all my classmates, I are agreeing kind of in this social contract, if you will, that we are going to adhere and subject ourselves to the same standard, right? And in doing that, I am mutually kind of agreeing with them and serving them in a way that I'm not making the implicit statement by breaking that code that I am above them, right? That I am outside of the rule, right? That they are for you, but not for me. And there's something in that, right? That is like, it's a little bit subtle, I guess, but it's a statement of humility relative to one another. And I think that's an important starting place for service. But beyond that, there is something about just when you have that as part of your culture, right? An act of service for another person, right, is not always, picking up their, the stuff that they dropped as they get into class or something, or holding a door or whatever. Those are things. Those are good. But it's a consistency, right, of continuing and taking pride in those things that buoys the whole class, right? Because if you have the case where you have a uniform and students wear it, but it's begrudging and everything about it is just constant, grumbling about it, then what you have, and it's enforced without a real, defense of why it's good. Then what you have is you don't have kind of mutual uplifting. You have mutual tearing down, right? But if you can convey to them that why it is good and have them really buy into that, which honestly by junior and senior year is really the case, right? We do not have any uniform issues with our juniors and seniors. It really has sunk in by then. And you see the difference in the attitudes of students. It's obviously part of just maturity, but the way that they wear their uniforms just really changes over the course of, that many years of wearing, especially the formal uniform. But that way of the act of service is that rather than, either kind of step outside a community by putting yourself above a rule or by begrudgingly, adhering to it, but with every intention of skimping out any possible way that you can kind of, skirt the rule, with pun intended, on exactly how you should wear it. You're not going to do it with pride. Then what you're doing for each other is not any way helping, right? You are just kind of commiserating. And so it can be an act of service if it's done in the right way, right? If you are wearing it proudly and you are conveying to your fellows that this is something that actually we should really take pride in and value, because as we've learned year in and year out, as our graduates come back, they go, it really was a big thing. It made a difference, right? That we all were just together and there was no distinction, right? And that it was nice to not have to worry about picking something out in the morning, right? and knowing that everyone else is wearing the exact same thing, and I will never have to think that they might be wearing a nicer, more kind of stylish or more kind of trendy outfit than I am, right? That is just, it's been proved over and over. And so that's a way that they can, as students, serve each other in that way by adhering to it with pride and fidelity.
Talking with Ian Nugent about the importance of wearing school uniforms, that there is an argument that goes that uniforms project an elitist image for students, and perhaps it's one that does not, in the end, benefit them. How do you respond to that argument?
So all the public schools, the kind of normal traditional public schools that aren't charter here in Atlanta, don't have uniforms, as most public schools don't, whereas all the private schools do. And so, it's often the claim of other students who go to schools, to our students, that we're uppity, right? We're elitist, and that we're basically a private school. And it is interesting in some ways, right? I think those judgments are made oftentimes, but in situations like I just described, in schools of close comparison, or people who have never actually been in a school with a uniform, because the uniform, in some ways, right, I'm making a big deal about it because I want it to be something that we can talk about in a meaningful way and that our students will actually love. But it's basically invisible, right? It's almost something we don't think about, and that is
Right.
kind of the point.
Mm-hmm.
And so no one at our school walks around thinking, I'm so proud of the fact that I have this collar and this tie, and that we have this plaid for our skirt, and that we only wear neutral colored shoes, right? We're above all that, all the flim flam of normal fashion. That's just, I can't imagine ever being in a student's mind. The other thing is, the most successful schools, and I mean, the most successful even charter schools, but let alone that are public in like New York City, for instance, that are serving a population that is anything but elitist, right? An entirely Title I population, and that have some of the best results for student outcomes in the nation, are rigorously adhering to some of the strictest standards of uniform and of student behavior. And so, yes, that we have in common with very elitist institutions like private schools that cost more than I paid for college here in Atlanta for a year of tuition for a high schooler. But it really is a superficial comparison, and I don't give it much weight, because I don't think the people who make that claim really have experienced what a school is like in a public setting that uses a uniform.
As a teacher, or as an assistant principal as you are, how do you navigate the supervision of a dress code, of a uniform code, with kindness and warmth for students? And I guess to that end, too, why is it so important to then enforce the uniform code strictly after it's in place?
I think I might do this in reverse. I mean, it is important to enforce, because for the same reason that any policy that you are claiming publicly as a policy, right, needs to be enforced. I think Hamilton or Madison in the Federalist Papers, right, say that, like, a law that is little known and without enforcement is no law, right? So if you have made it known that this is a policy, and then that's the first step, but then if you don't enforce it, it's not a rule, right? And so what you have is just kind of acknowledged hypocrisy, and you have students who are going to follow it because it's the rule, but they are going to be thinking, what is it about this place and these people that say one thing and then just don't follow through, right? That I'm adhering to this rule because I just don't see the point in breaking them. But anyone who does, there's no consequence, right? So we're all the same here, right? Following the rule is the same as not following the rule. That is a moral message you do not want to send to students, right? And again, I mean, that sounds pretty serious, but in actually enforcing it, again, like I said, making it a big deal in one way is important, and then talking about it in a way that acknowledges the fact that, hey, this is just the fact that you don't have a belt on, right? That, and this is a small thing, that you are again not wearing a tie with your formal uniform, right? Whatever the case is. Is that a hill to die on? No, right? Is it some? I mean, I'm also going to preview another piece I'm writing for the classical classroom, but I think we sometimes have this just instinctive. I mean, and I in the piece I'm writing, I talk about this moment in my first year teaching about just being completely indignant with my students, and I reflect on it with just absolute horror as I think about the fact that how crazy it was of me in some ways to be indignant, but also how crazy I must have seemed, right? It's like if we're getting like self-righteously angry and upset with students, that how could you dare violate this, this sacred law that our school has put in place for your good? We will seem deranged, right? But rather recognizing that it is important and making that case to them, but also acknowledging that the important thing for them is to, one, learn the responsibility, right, to be, to make sure they wear it correctly, that they have all the components and that they wear them every morning, that they prepare them if they have to the night before so they don't forget them. And then two, that they honor their fellow students by adhering to the same rule that they themselves are subjecting themselves to, right? That we are all subjecting ourselves to. And so to that extent, right, it's not that anyone who wears a belt, right, is like, well, that's a day of learning lost right there. There's no way you could possibly learn our curriculum without a belt on. But it's a matter of just kind of communicating to them that it is serious to the extent that it is a reflection of whether they want to believe this or want to acknowledge it or not, what they think of the activity of learning and who they're doing it with, that is their classmates. And it's a reflection of their ability to order themselves as a responsible person. And so oftentimes, in terms of just kind of enforcing this with some kind of warmth or whimsy, I often am kind of talking with students who have been referred to me for, some uniform infraction and saying, all right, so what's going on? Just kind of starting with a question and I just having them, articulate it to me. And oftentimes they will, in that answer, go, I know, I forgot. And I got to be better at it. I got to be better. And it's pretty infrequent that students are just, well, I just don't care. And so I'm refusing to follow this rule. Right? It's often absent-mindedness and carelessness. And so it's an opportunity, I tell students, right, to teach, right? I go to every classroom every year at the start of the year, and I ask the students K through 12 if they know what my job is, and they're all terrified to answer, right? Because if they get it wrong, they think they're going to be in trouble. But I tell them I'm a teacher, and they go, "What? That's not true. You're the bad guy." And I said, no, that my job, right, is teaching, right? Whether I'm teaching in my class, literally, because I do teach, or if I'm teaching, things that pertain to character, I think of myself as a teacher, right? And there are opportunities to teach in moments of failure, right? Or moments of forgetfulness. Those are opportunities. And so I'll make a plan with the student, say, listen, every night I put my shoes on the ground, I put my socks on top of them, I put the other necessities I need for getting ready right on top, and then I hang my tie, my shirt, and my pants on a bar in my bathroom, because I know I will forget something in the morning, or I just don't want to waste the time of looking for it, right? But I do that every night because I'm just like you. I would forget, and things would be a mess. So take that into consideration and just make yourself a plan like that. You will take the pressure off yourself, and it takes longer with some students than others, right? But eventually, like I said, by the time they're juniors and seniors, they really do get it. And that's the long game we're playing, right? We're not going to make, miracles happen, and we're not going to make them into human beings overnight. And we're not going to do it alone, right? This is also a work of partnering with parents as well, because they are the primary educators and rearers of these kids.
Final question for Ian Nugent as we talk about wearing school uniforms and the importance of doing so. Should a school uniform change in form as students mature and get older? Are those changes largely just cosmetic, or is there some meaning behind that too?
No, there is, and they absolutely should. There is a great documentary, actually, that I'm blanking on the name of, but it's about La Sierra High School in the 60s, and this PE program that they had that was one of the most rigorous in the nation. It was heralded by JFK and as just an incredible program. It created amazing fitness for their students. And it was so impressive, and that people asked, how did you get these kids to perform like this in physical education? And they had something that was just so simple and almost kind of crazily simple that it was just a matter of this tiered system of colors that they could earn, different PE uniforms and stripes and colors for shorts and workout tops. And it was this basically in this kind of gamifying of PE and making this incentive for competition that largely drove the success of this program. Now, I'm not saying this the same thing with school uniforms, but distinguishing between those who are in kindergarten versus those who are in third grade versus those who are in fifth and sixth versus seventh and eighth versus ninth and 10th versus 11th and 12th. It is a meaningful thing, right? Because we're telling students that we are preparing them to live responsible lives as self-governing individuals. And there are ways that you should, one, acknowledge that they are maturing and becoming more self-governing and more responsible, more virtuous, hopefully, just in how you communicate, how you talk, how you teach them. But part of that is also how they, the closer they get to being our peers, that they are then also kind of brought to the level of kind of looking more like us in the form of uniform that they wear. And so the seniors and juniors, they wear a jacket and tie, right? Which is our school's, male dress code, right? I'm talking about young boys right here, or young men. And so, and that means something, right? Because it is a visible sign that these are the leaders of the school. This is the end of our education. They are the exemplars of it. And every student that sees them on campus, right? When our seniors are TAing in kindergarten through second grade, those 5-year-olds and those 7-year-olds know those kids, right? When I'm wearing those uniforms, when I'm wearing that color plaid skirt with that, white button down as opposed to a polo, that means, I'm going to be one of the leaders, right? And just that means something to have a distinguished, to know kind of who you are in a place that has 700 students between the ages of 5 and 18. It really does matter to kind of form an identity for each particular tier of the school, right, in those grade bands. So I think that does matter, and it does reflect the fact that, they are growing, they're maturing, and that should be recognized in ways with certain privilege and certain just kind of matters of form. I think that means something.
Ian Nugent, Assistant Principal at Atlanta Classical Academy in Atlanta, Georgia, as we talk about the importance of wearing school uniforms. You can find his piece on this subject in the Hillsdale College Classical Classroom at the K-12 Education Office blog site. Ian, thanks so much for joining us here on the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast.
Thank you, Scott. Anytime. This is a lot of fun.
I'm Scot Bertram. We invite you to like us on Facebook. Search for Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education. You also can follow us on Instagram at Hillsdale_K12. Hillsdale_K12 on Instagram. Thank you for listening to the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast, part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio.